So, hello everyone, and welcome to the Get the Trolls Out podcast series. My name is Hannah, project manager of the Get the Trolls Out project, and today I'm joined by my colleague Rini, social media campaigner for Get the Trolls Out. Today we are also joined by Jonny Newton from the Community Security Trust based in the UK. So, warm welcome, Jonny. Thank you for joining us here today. And for our listeners, could you please tell us a little bit more about CST, your mission, and the work that you do?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you very much, Hania and Rini, for inviting me today. So, as you said, my name's Jonny Newton, and I'm the Director of External Relations at Community Security Trust, or known as CST. And we are my job is that I'm responsible in that role to represent CST to parliamentarians, to government departments in the UK, to local authorities, police, Jewish community allies, and increasingly non-Jewish communal allies as well across the protected characteristic space, and others, and all of whom are key stakeholders in our mission. And you ask about our mission and our work. So our main mission is pretty basic. It's to protect the Jewish community in the United Kingdom. And we do that in a number of different ways because unfortunately and sadly, like all Jewish communities across the world, we are also vulnerable in the UK to anti-Semitic hate crime, to anti-Semitic extremism, and anti-Semitic terrorism from the entire spectrum of extremism. So the extreme right wing, Islamist extremism, far left, and then what's kind of termed in the UK as mixed, unclear, and unstable, which includes kind of anti-Semitic conspiracies and so forth. So I kind of see ourselves as this thread, or I see anti-Semitism as a thread, or one of the threads that joins all of those extremisms together to a greater or lesser extent. And, a recent example includes, where it's moved into that terrorism space, includes the arson at a French synagogue just last weekend. And then a couple of weeks ago, there was the arrest of an Iranian-linked cell in Argentina who were planning to physically attack the Jewish community in the UK. So just to give two recent examples of when this has manifested into a terrorist threat or terrorism. With regards to what we do, we support the implementation of protective security measures, security planning and processes at Jewish communal buildings. We train local volunteers to provide a guarding service at Jewish community locations, and also to work as mobile teams working at Jewish events at non-Jewish locations. And we do all of that working very closely with the police, of course. We also manage a significant government grant, which contributes to the costs of commercial security, guarding at Jewish locations. We also encourage the Jewish community to report anti-Semitic incidents and anti-Semitic hatred to both the police and to CST. And we're a third-party reporter for the police. We have an information sharing agreement with them as well. And within that space, we undertake victim support, and then we also record and report anti-Semitic incidents in a responsible manner. In addition, we proactively research anti-Semitism in the UK, trying to understand who the main actors are, what sort of threat they pose. A huge amount of open source intelligence work where we make referrals to counterterrorism policing, where we feel that actors have moved into that terrorism space, or they can either have become or can become terrorism offenders. And then we try and represent all of this on behalf of the Jewish community to stakeholders in our mission in a responsible and a reliable way. Just to end this section, I wanted to just talk a little bit about the work that we're increasingly doing with other communities, which I think is really, really important. So, for a long time, we've had, I suppose, bilateral relationships with other faiths, with other representatives of protected characteristics, whether that's within the Muslim community, organizations like Tell Mama, who do monitoring of anti-Muslim hatred, very close relationship with an organization called Gallup that monitors LGBTQ plus hate crime, but increasingly we are seeking to use our kind of niche expert knowledge on communal security and share that with other faiths and other protected characteristics through a program that we have called SAFE, which stands for Security Advice for Everyone, and then also working in the educational space on a program that we have called Stand Up, which seeks to work with young people around educating specifically around anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hatred, but all other forms of hatred as well. And we do this with over 100 full-time staff, so we're quite a large organisation. We're a charity. We're principally funded by the Jewish community. We've got 3 offices around the UK and also around 2,000 volunteers as well.
Thank you so much. That's extremely impressive. And I think it's important, as you said, this interfaith dialogue and also support of each other, because at the end of the day, all minority groups, of course, do face levels of hatred, have to stand together. So on that note, I wanted to ask, CST has obviously observed a great rise in anti-Semitic incidents since January this year. I was wondering if you could tell us briefly about the trends and also what measures CST has taken to ensure the safety and well-being of the Jewish community, especially at this time of increased cases of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, no, you're right, Hannah. There has been an increase of anti-Semitism in the last 6 months of this year, certainly compared to the first 6 months of last year. But unfortunately, that trend isn't just limited to the first 6 months of this year. For several years now, we've been recording and reporting an elevated and sustained high level of anti-Semitism that's reported into CST over the years. And it's also important to note, and I think I actually haven't read in full detail the recent FRA survey into anti-Semitism across Europe, but I know from 2012 and 2017 surveys that they document a huge amount of underreporting of anti-Semitism, and I think that's the same across all reporting across hate crimes as well. So anti-Semitism, even though it's at an elevated level, we also know that it's still underreported. So when we're looking at the last few years, for the few years up to around 2023, there was around double the amount of anti-Semitic incidents that we were recording than we were in previous years, from around 2015 and before that. The majority of those incidents we categorize as abusive behavior, so relatively low-level harms. Many incidents occur online, but certainly not the majority. And it also includes incidents of assaults, of extreme violence, and other categories as well. And then we also record what we term as non-incidents that we don't publish, and they've also been increasing as well over the last few years, and that provides really useful intelligence to us and also intelligence to our partners in police and government to kind of understand that data as well. The reason why we've seen this increase has been for several reasons. So sadly, there's been a general increase in hate crime, not simply anti-Semitism, but anti-Semitism as part of that. There have been several large episodes that have increased hatred of other and have polarized communities and polarized societies. So specifically in the UK, we had the huge debate around Brexit. Less specifically to the UK, there was COVID and the impact that had on people's lives, and the sort of conspiracy theories about that, many of which were anti-Semitic, that fed into that anti-Semitism narrative. Again, specific to the UK, we had what we term the Labour anti-Semitism crisis under the leadership of the previous leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, that occurred for a few years up to around 2019. And we also see that anti-Semitism tends to excite anti-Semites. So the more of it that there is, the more that it's reported in the media, the more we feel that anti-Semites are emboldened to undertake hatred. And then, of course, there will be better reporting rates from within the Jewish community of anti-Semitism. So obviously, as I mentioned earlier, not all anti-Semitism is reported, but there will be better as a result of the sensitivity of the Jewish community around anti-Semitism. So even though this was at an elevated level, this all changed after October the 7th last year in 2023. We've known for decades now that there's always a spike in anti-Semitic incidents targeting Jewish communities when there is a escalation of the conflict in the Middle East. But in previous rounds of conflicts, if you want to term it like that, the incidents would fall back down to, in inverted commas, normal levels relatively quickly. October the 7th, it triggered a massive anti-Semitic backlash. And though the peak was in the immediate weeks after October the 7th, which led to a record total that we recorded last year in 2023. So over 4,000 anti-Semitic incidents compared to less than 2,000 the previous year. It hasn't fallen back to the previous levels that we knew. And as we've spoken about, the first 6 months of 2024 have seen this, I suppose you can coin it as a new normal of just under 200 incidents, or an average of over 300 per month. Again, it's important to understand that although the UK has got one of the larger Jewish communities in Europe, it's still relatively small compared to other minority ethnic communities. So there's less than 300,000 Jews living in the UK. So proportionally, this is a significant amount of anti-Semitic incidents that are occurring too. With regards to the second element of your question, about what we're doing about it, a lot of that I feel that I outlined in my answer to your first question about who we are and how we operate. But I also think it's key to talk about that our mission is not only to protect Jewish life, but it's also to protect the Jewish way of life. So it's always striking that balance between ensuring that the Jewish community are security aware, because we need to be, but not alarmed. And it's important that we can support the Jewish community by facilitating the community to continue living a proud and open Jewish lives as they wish. If people want to publicly identify as being Jewish, they should be able to do so, whilst also simultaneously being active and valued members of our wider shared society that we all enjoy.
Thank you, John. I think that last part is very prominent. And I think going back to what you mentioned about a lot of cases of anti-Semitism and hate occurring online, obviously at Get the Trolls Out, we monitor religious discrimination in all forms within the media space, traditional and social media. So in your view, I wanted to ask, what do you think the role of social media and mainstream media play in the rise of anti-Semitism in the UK? And how do you think that we could effectively address or combat this issue?
I mean, the second part of your question is really difficult about effectively addressing and combating. So I'll start with the easy part, which is talking about putting aside the mainstream media for the time being, the social media element, certainly with regards to kind of your focus and what we're seeing playing out in the incidents, is that social media really is a key issue here. It's a key driver of all forms of hatred. It's a key mechanism whereby people can target Jewish people with hatred, and indeed, people of any protected characteristic with hatred too, and our figures demonstrate this and play this out. It's also important to mention the caveat here that CST doesn't actively trawl for anti-Semitism online, so we don't include anti-Semitic incidents or anti-Semitic discourse that we have found as we've gone about our normal work. We only record anti-Semitic incidents where they have been actively reported to us by members of the Jewish community, and where either or both the victim or perpetrator are based in the UK. So although there are significant amounts of online anti-Semitism that make up our figures, our report really only provides an indication of the huge amount of online hatred that there is. In addition, we know that social media pushes misinformation and disinformation into the mainstream. And of course, we see this with anti-Semitism. We spoke earlier about COVID misinformation. So we saw it with COVID. Recently in the UK, we've seen disinformation pushed on social media that clearly led to the recent unrest, the recent riots, kind of known in the UK as the Southport riots because it was an incident in Southport that triggered it, and that principally targeted asylum seekers, refugees, members of the Muslim community, and then after that we saw bad faith actors using social media from all sides to blame Jews for the riots themselves, right? So if anybody has an axe to grind, they'll be able to use social media to push that out. So a really significant amount. When we think about what we can do, I mean, one thing that I do and plenty of my colleagues do is that we try to continue working in good faith with the main social media companies. So we try and support them, and we do support them in developing good community standards. And if you look at Meta's community standards, for example, they're really excellent. But the problem is the consistency in enforcing those community standards. So again, it's important for us to try and hold them to account, to enforce those standards, as well as working with them by reporting incidents into their trust and safety teams as well. But we've, certainly with the case of Twitter, or X as it's now known, we've really understood how brittle those relationships can be. Since X changed its policy to freedom of speech, not freedom of reach in their terms, we've seen an influx of what we would term hostile or bad faith actors coming back onto the platform. There's been a massive increase in anti-Semitism, a massive increase in hate content, and even terrorist content on the platform. And then outside of the work that we can do as community organizations, there's also the legislative agenda. So, in the UK, there's the Online Safety Act. It had been a long time coming. It's huge. It's complex, it's imperfect, but it will, I think, strengthen the ability of the state to hold the large social media companies to account through law. And I'm really interested in what happens in France with the Telegram case, right? Again, it's a very live issue. The founder and owner of Telegram, Pavel Durov, was arrested, I think, just 2 or 3 days ago, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens with that case. So, if he is found guilty of the illegality on Telegram as a platform, whether that will act as a mechanism whereby other owners who may find themselves personally liable for what occurs on their platform will be forced to act. So we watch that with interest.
Thank you. I think you touched again on so many important subjects, and one that also we highlight is this kind of open conversation with IT companies, because community standards can be in place, but they don't mean as much if they're not being implemented correctly. And as you said, also this implementation of the law, like the Online Safety Act, Digital Services Act in Europe, that's also extremely important, and to follow on that. So on a more positive note, to round up, as we look towards the future, what steps would you say are the most crucial for fostering a more inclusive and supportive environment for the Jewish community in the UK? And what message would you like to convey?
Well, I mean, the message is solidarity, I think, and the message is confidence, certainly for the Jewish community. I'm very fortunate that I live as a member of a traditionally very confident Jewish community who feels that they can express themselves. And as I mentioned earlier, it's really key that we continue supporting our community to be confident in expressing itself, which, certainly in the last 10 months and arguably for a few years before that as well, it has been much more of a challenge. But the flip side is that, in times of crisis, so to speak, in times of challenge, there's often a sense of solidarity and a sense of purpose and a sense of togetherness that the Jewish community has developed, and we've certainly seen that, and that's really inspiring in many ways, even though that it's come as a result of particular challenges. Looking forwards, kind of more widely, more strategically, I just believe that there needs to be a significant societal, and when I say societal, that includes government, faith groups, civil society, police, etc., a focus on improving cross-communal and social cohesion. So it's just so important to try and break down barriers, break down that misinformation and that disinformation, humanize different communities that often find themselves in conflict or at odds with each other, so that we just get to understand each other a little bit better and stop viewing each other as the other. But saying that, I still believe that there needs to be a continued zero tolerance approach to hate crime. So if people break the law, if people are responsible for the misinformation, for the disinformation, for perpetrating hate crime, for perpetrating hate incidents, then they need to face the full effect of the law, understand that is not acceptable. But then the wider element from that is what can we do, through educational programs, through grassroots initiatives, from recognizing really good grassroots programs and giving them the space to flourish, that we can develop and build that community cohesion, so that we're all working within, as we term in the UK, fundamental British values underneath that umbrella of respect and tolerance and liberty and understanding.
I think that's a perfect note to end this on. Thank you. I wanted to thank you, Jonny, for coming here today and for giving us insight into the work of CST. And thank you also to our listeners who joined us today. Thank you, Jonny.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to us today, and thank you, Jonny, for joining us. I'm sure our listeners have enjoyed listening to your work and also your personal reflections. We invite all our listeners to know more about CST and the efforts they do. We really appreciate all the work you're doing, and we particularly enjoyed listening to your points about the focus on improvising and improving cross-communal dialogue and social cohesion to break down barriers and humanize different communities. To know more about Get the Trolls Out and our broader initiatives, we invite you to visit our website, getthetrollsout.org. You can also follow us on social media at Get the Trolls Out. Stay tuned for more such podcasts, and we hope you enjoyed listening.